we hope to finish chapter 18. Now, chapter 18, as I've already told you, describes the destruction of the city of Babylon. Now, what's interesting is when people hear that, they automatically think of the modern state, or I shouldn't say the modern state, I should say the modern country of Iraq, because that was where Babylon was. And they're automatically in that mindset that Babylon it was in what was the modern state of Iraq. But I want you to understand that Babylon is used symbolically to refer to Rome. In fact, when the book of Revelation was written, Christians referred to Rome as Babylon. And I showed you that in the book of 1 Peter chapter 5, verse number 13. Peter writes this, "Your sister church here in Babylon sends you greetings, and so does my son Mark." Now, where was Peter when he wrote this book? He was in Rome. But in the first century, Christians referred to Rome as Babylon. Now, why did they do that? Well, you see, in 586 AD, the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem, the temple, and they carried the Jews into captivity. And in 70 AD, the Romans did the very same thing. So after 70 AD, Christians started referring to Rome as Babylon. In fact, that was the code for Rome. So in the book of Revelation, Babylon is used symbolically to refer to the city of Rome. So when we read about the destruction of Babylon in chapter 18, what we're really reading about is the destruction of the city of Rome. Now, the reason that Rome is so important is because it's going to be the capital city of the revived Roman Empire. But more importantly, it is going to represent the political, religious, and economic system of the beast. You see, during the last half of the tribulation, the beast is going to tie his political, his religious, and his economic policies together. As part of his economic policy, people are going to have to take the mark if they want to buy and sell. So if you want to have a job, they're not going to be able to pay you unless you have the mark. If you want to go out and buy something, you're not going to be able to do it unless you have the mark. If you want to sell something, you're not going to be able to do that unless you have the mark. And as a part of his religious policy, people are going to be required to worship the image of the beast. So his religious and his economic policies are going to be tied in together with his political policies. Does that make sense? Now, that's important. And the reason it is because as the capital city of the revived Roman Empire, Rome is going to represent the political, religious, and economic system of the beast. So this is kind of confusing, and here's why I say that. Babylon really means Rome. And when we talk about Rome, it's the capital city of the revived Roman Empire. But we're really referring not just to the city of Rome, but also this whole system that the beast has set up. And the reason we say that is because it represents the system of the beast. Just as Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States, represents the political system of the United States. But, and let me say, but, Washington, D.C. does not represent our economic system. Wall Street does. Why? Because our political, religious, and economic systems are not tied together. At least they're not supposed to be. But when the beast comes on the scene, he's going to gain such authority and such power, he's going to be able to actually tie his political, his religious, and his economic policies all together, and the capital of his kingdom is going to be Rome. Now, why is that important? It's important because chapter 18 doesn't just describe the destruction of Rome. It also describes the destruction of the political, religious, and economic system of the beast. I want you to think about this. We're going to get to the point in chapter 18 where the kings are looking at the destruction of Babylon. In other words, Rome. And they're going to begin to lament and they're going to begin to wail. If it was just one city, why would they do that? Yes, it's a horrible thing, but it doesn't mean that we can't get over this. Oh, yes, it does. Because it's not just talking about the destruction of Rome, which it is, but Rome also represents a system, the system of the beast. Does that make sense? Good. Now, let me begin by giving you a basic outline of chapter 18, because I think if you can see how chapter 18 is laid out is going to help you to understand exactly what you're reading. So here's a basic outline of chapter 18. In fact, it's going to come up on the screen. Just kind of follow along with me. In verses 1 through 3, an angel announces the fall of Babylon. In verses 4 through 8, believers are commanded to leave the city. In verse 4, it's the command to leave, and in verses 5 and 8, it's the reason for God's judgment upon Babylon and why they need to leave. In verses 9 through 19, three groups lament over Babylon's destruction. In verses 9 and 10, you have the kings of the earth lamenting over her destruction. In verses 11 through 17a, you have the merchants lamenting over her destruction. In 17:9 through 19, you have the sea captains and the sailors lamenting over her destruction. And then in verse number 20, there's a call for the heavens and all the saints to rejoice over the destruction of Babylon. And then in verses 21 through 24, you have the destruction of Babylon. And basically, it's a visual picture of the destruction of Babylon, and it's giving us finality. It's giving us kind of this overall sense that Babylon's never going to be raised again. This system is dead, and it's gone. So what I want to do as you look at this outline is I want to follow the outline as we go through chapter 18, and I think it'll help you make more sense of this as you read through it later on. The first three verses simply announce the fall of Babylon, so turn to verses 1 through 3. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. Now, let me just say this. This is not Jesus Christ. There are some scholars that say this is Jesus Christ, but in the book of Revelation, Jesus is not referred to as an angel. But I want you to notice something. This angel has great authority. That means that he's in the presence of God. And if you remember, whenever Moses went into the presence of God in the tabernacle, when he came out, what happened to his face? His face almost glowed, it illuminated. So this is kind of giving us the very same picture. This is an angel with great authority. It means he's in the presence of God. So when he comes, of course, the earth is going to be illuminated by his splendor because he's been in the presence of God, the glory of God. Verse 2. With a mighty voice he shouted, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a home for demons and a haunt for every evil spirit, a haunt for every unclean and detestable bird. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries." Now I want you to notice that verse number 1 begins with, "after this." In other words, after the seventh vial of God's wrath is poured out. After this, an angel announces that Babylon has fallen. In other words, Babylon has finally been destroyed. The word fallen is written in the aorist tense, which means that it has already happened. So when the seventh vial of God's wrath is poured out upon the earth, the earthquake is going to occur. And when that earthquake occurs, Babylon is going to be destroyed. Now, what the angel says next is very interesting. The angel says that Babylon has become a home for demons and a haunt for every evil spirit and a haunt for every unclean and detestable bird. Now, this can be interpreted in one of two ways. It can mean that Babylon has become a deserted place. It's been destroyed and now it's deserted. Because in Jewish tradition, demons and unclean spirits lived in deserted places. In fact, if you remember when Jesus was teaching on demonic spirits, and he talked about demonic spirits being cast out, that they go into a desert place, and then they come back, and they find a home that's been cleaned out, and they come and they bring 7 more wicked. Do you remember that story? Well, that kind of comes from Jewish tradition. So what they believe, or some scholars believe, is that this is the result of her complete destruction. She's completely deserted, and that's all that this is saying. The second interpretation is that this can mean that Babylon became a habitation for demons before her fall. That her abominable practices not only opened the door to demons, but they attracted demonic spirits, and that was one of the reasons that Babylon was judged. Now, I can't tell you which interpretation is right. And the reason I can't tell you which interpretation is right is because the way that it's written in the original Greek text can go either way. But I tend to think, personally, that the second interpretation is right. I believe that Babylon will become a habitation for demons and a haunt for every unclean spirit before she falls, and that will be one of the reasons that she's destroyed. And verse 3 tends to support that. Look at verse number 3 again. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. In other words, Babylon enticed the kings to participate in her immorality. But she's the main culprit. She willingly committed spiritual adultery. And then she enticed the other nations to commit adultery with her. Now, adultery represents idolatry in the Bible. And in the book of Revelation, it specifically refers to worshiping the image of the beast. So what this is saying is that she entices the other nations to also worship the image of the beast. Now, verse number 3 explains the means by which she's going to entice all the kings of the earth to worship the image of the beast. She's going to use the promise of power and the enticement of wealth and luxury to get them to follow her lead. You see, there's something enticing about having prosperity. I don't know what it is about humans, but we'll do just about anything to get rich. Now, most of us have a line that we won't cross. Well, I won't prostitute myself out, or I won't sell drugs, or I won't rob a bank. But what's kind of interesting? When large sums of money are placed in front of people, they'll do some very strange things to try and get that money. And what's interesting is, when the beast comes in and he sets up his kingdom, he is going to set up a system in which people have to take the mark in order to buy and sell, and those who take the mark must worship the image of the beast. That is the adultery that she participates in. But in order to be able to entice the other kings to come into this system and to buy into it, she's got to be able to offer them something. She's got to be able to entice them with something. And what we're going to find out as we read through chapter 18 is that what she entices them with is wealth and luxury. And it's such a wonderful thing to have all of this prosperity. But my point is this: worshiping the image of the beast opens the door to all types of demonic activity. That's why I believe that Babylon is going to become a habitation for demons before her destruction. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, in verses 4 through 8, believers are commanded to leave the city before she's destroyed. Look at verse number 4. Then I heard another voice from heaven say, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues." Now, this indicates that there's going to be a few believers who will make it to the very end of the tribulation without being martyred. We talked about this. We said that the majority of believers are going to be martyred during the second half of the tribulation. In fact, a few are martyred in the first half of the tribulation, but it's just a few in number. And remember, they're crying out to the Lord. They're underneath the altar. And he says, wait a minute. He says, you're going to have to wait. And he tells them they're going to have to wait until all the rest of them come in. And what's interesting about this is that the indication is the mass murder that's going to occur in the second half is going to affect almost all believers. But there's going to be a few that are actually going to make it to the end of the tribulation. Not many, but a few. And those few are encouraged to leave the city. Now, I believe this applies to more cities than just Rome, and I'll tell you why I believe that. I believe that they're being told to leave every city that's part of the revived Roman Empire. And the reason I believe that is because if you remember, Rome is the capital of the revived Roman Empire. It represents the political, the religious, and the economic system of the beast. But all of the other cities in the revived Roman Empire are going to be under the beast rule. So I believe that this is a command to leave any city in the revived Roman Empire, and I'll tell you why. Because he gives two reasons why they should leave, and these two reasons would actually apply to anyone that's in any city that's in the revived Roman Empire. Let's look at the two reasons why they're told to leave. The first one is so that they won't share in her sins. You see, believers are going to be under constant pressure to take the mark of the beast and to worship the image. Simply because you can't buy or sell, you can't work, you can't do anything to be able to provide for yourself or your family without doing that. And if they don't get out from underneath that pressure, they're going to succumb to it. So what does this voice from heaven tell them? He tells them to leave the city so they won't share in her sin. In other words, so they won't give in to the pressure. And the second reason that they're told to leave is so that they won't receive any of her plagues. In other words, they won't be there when her destruction comes. Now, if you're in the city when the seventh vial of God's wrath is poured out, you're going to be destroyed right along with Babylon, because the whole city is going to be wiped out. So we could look at this and we could say, well, this voice from heaven is just telling the believers to get out of Rome. But when I look at the other reason that they're told to leave, which is that they could possibly share in the same sin, they're going to be underneath this pressure, I come to the conclusion what this voice from heaven is telling them is to get out from any of the cities that's underneath the rule of the beast. Now, verses 5 through 8 explain the reasons for God's judgment coming upon her. Let's read verses 5 through 8. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Give back to her as she has given. Pay her back double for what she has done. Mix her a double portion from her own cup. Give her as much torture and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. In her heart she boasts, I sit as queen. I am not a widow, and I will never mourn. Therefore in one day her plagues will overtake her. Death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her. Now, verse 5 tells us that her sins piled up to heaven. In other words, her sins were so many and they were so great that if you piled them up on each other, they would reach all the way to heaven. And God can't ignore that because it's on His doorstep. Verse 6 is simply the law of retribution. In other words, the punishment fits the crime. She's going to get exactly what she deserves. Now, when you read these verses, when you get to verse number 6, and you read verses 7 and 8, it seems at first glance that she's receiving a greater punishment than what she deserves. Because it says, pay her back double for what she has done. Now, in our English or our Western civilization, when we hear that, the first thing we think of is that means twice as much. Pay her back double. Give her twice as much. But that's not what God means by pay her back double for what she has done. You see, the word double is translated from the Greek word diplus, and it means double in the sense that an identical twin is the double of his or her sibling. If we brought identical twins up here and we took one and we said, this is so-and-so, and then we would look at the other one and we would say, this is her double. What do we mean by that? What we mean is they look exactly alike. She's an exact copy of her sister or his brother. In fact, there's actually some discrepancy as to where our English word duplicate comes from. Some scholars think that it comes from a Latin word. Others think that it comes from this very Greek word. But a duplicate is an exact copy. So what verse number 6 is saying is make sure she gets exactly what she deserves. In other words, she did these sins and this is the punishment. So you make sure that you make an exact copy that she gets this punishment, exactly what she deserves. Now, when her destruction comes upon her, it's going to be a huge shock. It's going to be a huge shock to the beast. It's going to be a huge shock to everyone that's in this system because Rome or Babylon thinks that she's invincible. Look at the last part of verse number 7. In her heart she boasts, I sit as queen. I am not a widow and I will never mourn. Now I want you to notice her attitude. First of all, she boasts that she's a queen. Now why would she not say, I'm a king? Because when you refer to cities, you refer to them in the feminine gender, right? New York is a she. London is a she. We don't refer to Tahlequah as a he. Maybe we do that in church. No, I'm just kidding. When you refer to cities, you refer to them in the feminine gender. So what she's saying when she says, I'm a queen, is that I rule the world. No one can take me down. Secondly, she makes the boast that she's not a widow. Now, we really don't understand this statement because we've never lived in a culture where it is such a hardship to be a widow. But you need to understand that in the ancient world, becoming a widow was the fear of every woman. It was the fear of every woman. Because it was difficult to make it in their culture without having a male provider and a male protector. And Babylon here sees the beast as her husband. She's the city, she's the capital, she's the queen, and the beast, the system, it's her husband. And she thinks that she can't be whittled. In other words, she believes that the beast is invincible, that he cannot be conquered. And as a result of that, she's shocked when she goes down. And last but not least, she boasts that she will never mourn. So for these reasons, she's going to be destroyed. Let's go over the reasons. Number one, she became a habitation for demonic spirits and a haunt for every unclean spirit. Number two, she committed spiritual adultery and enticed others to commit adultery with her. And what was the adultery? She worshiped the image of the beast. And she enticed others to worship the image of the beast. And she used her wealth and she used her power to entice other nations to do the same thing. Number three, her sins are so many and so great. And the reason he just left it at that is because you could go into, well, she martyred the saints, they did this, they did that, but they didn't do that. He just came and said her sins are so many and so great that if you piled them on top of each other, they would reach the heavens. And number four, she boasted that she can't be destroyed. For these reasons, she's going to be destroyed in 1 hour, in 1 day. In fact, it says in 1 day, but we get to the very end, it says in 1 hour. And what that means is suddenly. Look at verse number 8. Here we see the 1 day. We'll get to the 1 hour in just a little bit. Therefore, in 1 day, her plagues will overtake her, death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her. Now, when she's destroyed, 3 groups are going to lament over her destruction. That's in verses 9 through 19. So let's kind of break it up into the 3 different groups because they all lament over her for different reasons. The first group that's mentioned is found in verses 9 and 10. It says, when the kings of the earth who committed adultery with her and shared her luxury see the smoke of her burning. Why the smoke of her burning? Because she's going to be on fire. When this earthquake occurs, it's just going to totally demolish it, and you're going to see the rubble, the smoke from the rubble coming up. You're going to see all the fires caused by all the electrical problems. All of these things are coming up. So it says, when it sees the smoke of her burning, they're going to weep and mourn over her. Terrified at her torment, they will stand far off and cry, woe, woe, O great city, O Babylon, city of power. In 1 hour, your doom has come. Now, the reason they weep over her destruction is twofold. First of all, since they committed adultery with her, they actually feel like they're losing a lover. But I would say it this way. They're losing a partner in crime. It's kind of like when you see someone doing something you know they shouldn't do, but boy, it looks very lucrative, and after a while you realize they're not going to get caught, so you join in. And then you just happen to be at a different place at a different time, and as you're pulling up, you see that they're being arrested, and the first thing you do is you stand afar off because you don't want to be a part of that, but you're also thinking, oh no, I participated in that too. And that's what the kings are doing. The second reason that they weep over her is because they lived in sensuous luxury with her, and as a result of her, and now she's gone. They're losing the wealth and the power that they received as a result of giving in to her enticements. You see, and this is the point I want everyone to really come out of this with a good understanding of. The beast kingdom is going to bring such economic prosperity and wealth to these kings that it is going to be so hard for any nation in the world to literally say no to it. And one of the reasons why is because of the policies he's going to actually put in. The mark that he gives to the people in order for them to be able to buy or to sell, it's really going to be something that ends up being good in an economic sense. Not in a spiritual. Don't anyone go out and say, Pastor said the mark of the beast is going to be good. No, I did not say that. I just want you to understand, as we're coming into this technology and beginning to understand what we're capable of doing, the majority of scholars believe that actually what this is going to be is a chip that's embedded right underneath the skin. It's going to be placed in your forehead, and if you don't have that, because maybe you don't have any arms, it's going to be on your forehead. But I want you to think about this. If you're doing that, it's going to require a system that not only connects everyone and identifies who you are, but probably has GPS tracking, all of those different things. It also means that you've got to have a system that can't be compromised. Now, when you create this type of system, it's going to eliminate identity theft. I mean, you can't buy or sell and they'll know it. But not only that, think about how the kings are going to like this. And the reason the kings are going to like this, you can't buy or sell without it. Right now, you can buy and sell and you can lie on your IRS forms, can't you? You don't have to pay taxes on that if you cheat. Well, pay me in cash and we'll put this underneath. We're going to go to a cashless society when the beast comes in. I shouldn't say we because I'm not going to be here, but you guys might. Now, you're going to go to a cashless society when the beast comes in because you can't buy or sell without this mark, and it's probably, as I said, going to be a chip. So what takes place is there won't be any money. Money will be worthless. And so there's no reason to get that boat or to buy that car, to do this and that, because you have nothing to give, and I guarantee you're not going to be able to barter with enough potatoes to pay for a house. But the interesting thing about it, because of the way this system works, you can't fudge on your taxes either. These kings are going to become wealthy upon this system. So when Babylon is destroyed, so is their gravy train. Remember, Babylon isn't just a city. Babylon is also an economic system. It's the economic system of the beast. And so when this capital city is destroyed, it means the economic system of the beast is also destroyed, and that means that their gravy train is gone. And so the kings are looking back at this, and they realize, man, this is a thing of God, but at the same time they're going, it's gone. Our wealth, our luxury, all that we had. Now the second group that laments over her destruction are the merchants. Turn to verses 11 through 17. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen, purple silk, and scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, and articles of every kind made of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble. Cargoes of cinnamon and spice, of incense, myrrh, and frankincense, of wine and olive oil, of fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and carriages, and bodies and souls of men. Interesting. They will say, the fruit you longed for is gone from you. All your riches and splendors have vanished, never to be recovered. The merchants who sold these things and gained their wealth from her will stand afar off, terrified at her torment. They will weep, they will mourn, they will cry out. Woe, woe, O great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and glittering with gold, precious stones and pearls. In 1 hour, such great wealth has been brought to ruin. So all of these merchants who became wealthy in the revived Roman Empire are going to lament over her destruction. Now it's kind of interesting, and I can see the parallel here. Many of the scholars believe that the wealth of future Rome is going to be much like ancient Rome. And when you go back to ancient Rome and you look at her when she was at the pinnacle of her power, it is amazing the extravagant luxuries that they had in the city of Rome. They were basically bringing things from every part of the world, the known world at the time. How many of you know that they actually brought things from China? They did. They brought things from India and from China and from North Africa and from the Middle East. They brought things from all over the world, and it's going to be the same way. So these merchants who have become wealthy because of the revived Roman Empire are going to lament over her destruction. But it's not because they care for her. The reason they're going to lament is because no one's going to buy their cargoes anymore. In fact, that's the very first thing it says. They cry out because no one's going to buy their cargoes anymore. And then John begins to list in verses 12 and 13 all the things that they sowed. Now, his list is grouped into 6 different categories. You have precious stones and metals, luxurious fabrics, expensive wood and building material, spices and perfumes, food, animals, and slaves. Now, it's kind of interesting, and I think the reason that he goes into such depth is because he wants you to understand that we're not just talking about 1 or 2 things. We're just talking about a system that they're bringing in all of these things from all over the world, and there is such a demand for them. But the most interesting thing is the last part. Slaves. In fact, in the original Greek, it talks about human souls. But the reason it says animals and souls, human souls, is because it's emphasizing that in this particular culture, they're going to see slaves as animals. In fact, I don't know if you realize this, but when Rome was at the pinnacle of its power, they had so many different slaves. It was just unbelievable how many slaves that people owned. It was a status symbol. And they referred to their slaves as talking tools, thinking tools. They did not see them as human souls. And so it's telling us that there's going to become such wealth there that they're literally going to begin to bring people in and use them as slaves. But you can also see why other nations are enticed to become a part of it. We're talking about economic prosperity that we've never seen before. And now that we have such a global economy, when you have one part of the globe that's beginning to have such prosperity, everyone wants to be a part of it. You know, when China was in the boom, and even now, you know, you're thinking, boy, to get back into China, should we do that? If you were buying certain mutual funds in China, man, it was skyrocketing. You can invest in certain things in China, but it's always a little bit scary when you do that because they're still a communist government. And if they want to, they can come in and say, okay, we're just going to take this company, and there it goes. But you know, everyone wants to be a part of that. And in this global economy, you're going to see a part of the world. And remember, I told you that the kingdom of the beast, it's talking about the revived Roman Empire. It doesn't mean it's going to be over the entire world as some scholars talk about it being. It's not. But it's going to entice all of the other nations to want to be a part of this. Now, when Babylon falls, the merchants are going to weep over her for one simple reason. There's no one to buy their goods. And then it says that it happens in 1 hour. This earthquake from the seventh vial of God's wrath is going to totally wipe out the city of Babylon almost instantly. Look at the first part of this passage. They will weep and mourn and cry out, woe, woe, great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. In 1 hour, such great wealth has been brought to ruin. Now, I want you to see, the reason it says it this way is because this is the perception of the merchants. They don't go, think about all those poor people that died in that city. They're not thinking that way. Did you see that? In 1 hour, such great wealth has been brought to ruin. They just see this in dollar signs. You know, it's kind of sad, but we're that way as humans. You invest into something, and maybe it's something that goes bad because there was some type of disaster and something's destroyed. You know, we don't go, how many people were killed? The first thing that we think of is, what about my money? And this is the way the merchants are. When this city is destroyed, the first thing they think is, man, in 1 hour, such great wealth has been brought to ruin. Now, the third group that laments over her destruction is found in the last part of verse number 17 through 19. So turn to verses 17 through 19. It says, every sea captain and all who travel by ship, the sailors and all who earn their living from the sea will stand far off. When they see the smoke of her burning, they will exclaim, was there ever a city like this great city? They will throw dust on their heads and with weeping and mourning cry out, woe, woe, O great city, where all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. In 1 hour she has been brought to ruin. Now, the third group are the sea captains, the sailors, every person who makes their living transporting material throughout the Mediterranean Sea, and as the other nations begin to come out throughout all of the oceans. And they're going to lose their livelihood when Babylon is destroyed. You see, they've become wealthy from Babylon, and now it's gone. And so when you're reading through chapter 18 and you're reading about these three groups lamenting over Babylon, when you get to the very end of that part, you immediately think that it's going to talk about the destruction of Babylon, but it doesn't. One group is going to rejoice over the destruction of Babylon. Who's going to rejoice over the destruction of Babylon? Christians. But where are those Christians going to be? There going to be many Christians on the earth? No, most of them are raptured out, and the ones who became saved afterwards, they're going to be martyred. You're going to have a few that's left, but who's going to be rejoicing? Those in heaven. Look at verse number 20. Rejoice over her, O heaven. Rejoice, saints and apostles and prophets. Everything that you've looked forward to is coming to a climax. God has judged her by the way that she treated you. Now, at first, It might seem kind of offensive to rejoice over the destruction of all of these cities, and especially this one big city and all the people that must have died as a result, until you remember who Babylon represents. Babylon is Rome. And as the capital city of the revived Roman Empire, she represents, as I've been saying, the political, the religious, and the economic system of the beast. The same system that murdered the saints. The same system that required all of its citizens to worship the beast. The same system that blasphemed God and refused to repent of their sins and said, "No way." So this judgment is just and it's fair. God's saints are finally going to be vindicated, and divine justice is finally going to be served, and heaven rejoices over this because God cannot set His kingdom up upon this earth until His judgment comes, and this is His judgment coming. And then chapter 18 ends with a visual picture of the destruction of Babylon. Let's read verses 21 through 24 because this is a beautiful picture. Then a mighty angel picked up a boulder the size of a large millstone and threw it into the sea and said, "With such violence the great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again." What could destroy a city like that? That great earthquake. The music of harpists and musicians, flute players and trumpeters will never be heard in you again. No workman of any trade will ever be found in you again. The sound of a millstone will never be heard in you again. The light of a lamp will never shine in you again. The voice of bridegroom and bride will never be heard in you again. Your merchants were the world's great men. By your magic spell all the nations were led astray. In her was found the blood of prophets and of all the saints and of all who have been killed on the earth. As I said, this is a great picture of what's going to take place. In fact, verse number 21 is a great picture of what's going to happen once Babylon is destroyed, or when Babylon is destroyed. This angel picks up a huge boulder the size of a millstone and throws it into the sea. Now, the millstone that we're talking about is not the small stone that women used with their hands and had this little hand mill, and they did their own little bit that they would prepare for one meal. No, it's talking about a large millstone that had to be turned by oxen. It's the type of millstone that would weigh several tons. And so he picks up this boulder that weighs several tons and he throws it into the sea. Now here's what's interesting. Whenever you throw a boulder like that into the sea, you can't pull it out. Man, it's there for good. Now, I'm not saying with modern technology we couldn't go down there and pick that boulder up, but in the picture in John's day, when you threw a boulder into the sea, what it meant is it's over, it's there. You can't bring it out. It's there for good, and that's the point. He's giving a visual picture of what's going to happen to Babylon. When it's destroyed, it will never rise again. It's over for good. Now, if you remember, when we looked at the 7 heads upon the beast, we said that every one of those heads represents a kingdom that persecuted Israel. And it started all the way back. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medes and Persians, Greece, Rome. You see, we're going through all of this, and what's interesting is one empire would be destroyed, but that was okay. Another empire would come up. Do you know what he's telling us here? This is it, people. When God destroys this last empire, when He destroys the kingdom of the beast, there's not going to be another evil one that takes its place. This time, Jesus Christ is going to return. And He's going to set up His kingdom on earth. And we're never again going to have that kingdom or any kingdom like it ever set up on the earth again. Now, to drive the point home, he starts giving the examples of everyday life that will no longer exist and will never exist again in Babylon. Musicians will never be heard in Babylon again. No craftsman of any trade will ever work in Babylon again. No one will ever prepare food in Babylon again. There will never be any more homes in Babylon. That's what it meant by lamps. Those lamps he's talking about are those little bitty lamps that they would light and you would place in the homes at night. And no one will ever experience the joy of being married in Babylon again. Now, why does he say in Babylon? because people will live on the earth. And we're going to find that out when we get to the millennium. We're going to live on the earth and we're going to experience all of these things. Musicians are going to be there, craftsmen. But Babylon represents all of these world empires that were against God. It represents the system of the beast who's empowered by the devil. And Babylon is going to be gone forever when it's destroyed. Now here's the interesting thing. When Rome is destroyed and the cities are destroyed, there's going to be those who escape. They weren't killed. And they're going to come to this valley of Armageddon. And when they're there at the valley of Armageddon, they're still defiant. There's no way this is going to be taken from them. And we're going to find out in chapter 19, Jesus Christ returns. But that's chapter 18. And hopefully with my outline, you can go home tonight. You can read through it, and you go, I understand this.